All right, here's a brief introduction to preparing a case response, give you just a little bit of suggestions about how to be able to get that done. I think I identify sort of four key things that you need to try and be able to do. They sound a lot easier than they actually are when you get down to writing it up. You do need to have a general understanding of what's going on in the case, and in particular, you use the questions that are posed in the case write-up assignment. You go back to the relevant literature, and typically every one of these cases is tied to specific chapters in the textbook, and so you look to those chapters to provide guidance and insight, and then you look for a way to be able to integrate the literature to the issues that are identified in the case or brought up in the case. So how do you figure out what's going on and really be able to get a handle on this? It's important to just kind of read over these things on your own and sit down and think about some of this stuff, list some of it. How can we sort of cluster some of the issues? Some of it has to do with the executive, some of it has to do with the board, some of it has to do with planning, customers, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to think about these things, but also important to share your ideas with others and get perspective from other students in the classroom and see what they're thinking are some of the important elements, and in particular how they relate to the questions that are posed. So as you look at the case, you really think about what is it that the instructor is asking us to focus in on. So every one of the cases have specific questions detailed in the grading guide. And you really do need to be able to address those questions and consider your response in relation to what those questions are asking. In addition, I really want to see an appropriate use of literature. And so this typically means the stuff that we talked about in class. You can go out and get some other stuff as well, related topics, go to resources on the web or other kinds of readings that you've used. But in particular, I want to see that you're drawing out appropriate aspects of the literature from the chapter and applying that to the case in the right kind of way. And as I say, sort of try and put those things together, some sense about what's going on in the case with the appropriate literature. This is tricky. It's not necessarily readily apparent on any one of those formats. I think in general, people can get a handle on the issues of the case, and what they find themselves doing is writing too much about what they feel is the summary of the issues in the case, and they don't do enough in reference to analyzing the material from the literature, applying the material from the literature, and providing some recommendations or some suggestions about what needs to get done. And it really does take some attempt to clarify what it is that you're trying to say, and then editing back down to that. And I highly encourage people to write significantly more than ultimately gets communicated back to me. These are typically short, pretty concise documents, and the only way you're going to get there is if you allow yourself some time to be able to write things out just a little bit, and it moves fast. So that means the early part of the week you should have a pretty be working pretty heavily to address the concerns of understanding what's going on in the case and identifying some of the key themes, linking in some of the literature, and that you have a pretty good draft by midweek if you can, or at least are on your way, so that by Thursday or Friday you've got yourself a pretty solid draft of multiple pages of the document, so that on Saturday you can allow yourself plenty of time to go back and focus and edit that some more and bring it down to the word lengths that are required, but really get to the point that you're trying to get to. And it's a tricky piece. Typically, an ideal response is going to provide a modest sort of context of what's going on, a brief reference to the appropriate literature, and then a weaving together of the context of the case with the literature in such a way as to move forward your response or your reaction to the questions that are posed to you. And you're supposed to do that in roughly about 800 to 1,200 words. And so that's quite a bit of work, and it takes quite a bit of time to be able to get yourself down to a response format that's going to be concise like that, that's really going to be able to get to what it is that I want you to be able to communicate with me in that kind of time frame. And again, thinking about who you're writing toward me as the manager and somebody who's quite familiar with the issues in the case. And so I want to hear your or thoughts or your perspective, and in particular, what is it about the literature that's you learned that could be applied to this case that might provide some insight and some guidance. One of the things that we see is people tend to spend too much time writing up a summary of the case. If you've written multiple pages about what happened in the case, you're not focusing in on the right kinds of stuff. You need to edit most of that out. People don't oftentimes take enough time to really answer the question. They do a lot of dancing around and filling in a lot of stuff. Poor formatting is not good, and so real clearly signifying when you're moving from question to question is important, but also even some of the sub-questions can be signaling to me. When you're in a time constraint in reference to space and size, formatting can make actually a really big difference about communicating a lot. Again, people are not editing sufficiently to be able to get to the answer that they're trying to get to, primarily because people don't have a good answer, right? So you need to be able to get your thinking sufficiently developed so that you can put it down on a piece of paper, and it doesn't happen in the midst of writing this thing at 10 o'clock on Saturday night and 45 minutes before you need to get it submitted. And then people sometimes just grab any kind of literature that they can get and throw it in there and hope that I won't notice. And unfortunately, I do. So it's tricky, but it's not, right? It's thinking about what's going on in the case and what we read about during the week and trying to be able to apply that material in such a way to come to a recommendation or a conclusion or a response to those questions. But to be able to do that requires a fair amount of time. And so I encourage you to work on these throughout the week and share your thoughts and perspectives with other students in the class.